Alrighty, guys, welcome back. HaloTheorist here on my podcast. With me today, I have my good friend Brody. How's it going, Brody?
Man, it's going great, dude. Just got back home from the old boat.
Well, it's good to hear from you, man. I love talking to you and love talking to you about Halo. Today, guys, Brody actually has some questions for me. Brody's not really into Halo as much as I am, with all the lore and the extensive universe knowledge that I have. He's kind of, I would say, an up-and-coming individual who wants to get to know more about Halo, and he has some very interesting questions that I feel that a lot of YouTubers on YouTube usually cover, sometimes here and there, but hopefully today with my extensive knowledge, Brody can ask these questions, and maybe I can do a little bit of a better job explaining some of these things for some of you guys that want to know more. And if this video, this podcast does well, I'd be more than happy to do this again. Maybe some, question and answering for any lower topics that, I could just briefly go over. And if there's one that I like, I might even do one with the channel. So, Brody, I'll leave it to you, man. Why don't you start with some questions and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, and okay, guys. So my questions are pretty much, like Jeremy kind of covered it. I'm not too deep into the lore. I played the Halo games like Combat Evolved, Halo 2, the original OGs. But my questions are they're based on what you'd say is a real world, almost like a history buff perspective. Because, for example, kind of just jumping into the first question is the combat techniques of the Spartans. Exactly. The evasive maneuvers. Like, is there anything special into these? Into their what makes them besides genetically being augmented? Is there combat techniques that differ from the regular Marines, or Jeremy, can you answer this? Is it ever explained in the lore?
Yeah. So I'll start with talking about the Spartan 2s, which are individuals like Master Chief. As Brody, as you said, they are augmented soldiers. So, these guys have their bones replaced, they're like Wolverine. Their bones are as hard as metal and things like that. That gives them a physical advantage on the field. But very early on, and many, I guess some guys who've been following Halo, and Bungie actually, filled this in originally with the books and some backstory in the games. These kids, or these soldiers were kidnapped as kids when they were 6 years old, and they were genetically augmented. So from 6 years old, they've been studying all forms of combat. Everything from the Battle of Thermopylae with the 300 to our times now, with World War I, World War II, and they've been learning and soaking in all the information they could with tactics and strategy. On top of that, they've been going in and they've been applying this in the field over and over and over again before they ever put on a suit of armor, which is the Mjolnir armor, which is so iconic with Master Chief. Their ability to assess and to react is already amplified, times 10. Certain Spartans have certain augmentations and certain benefits with their armor variants that can help them even more. But with their actual tactics that they're using, there are tactics that we use today in the real world, and there are tactics that in the Halo universe that they actually have. Spartans are trained to be able to pretty much handle any weapon, any vehicle, in pretty much any scenario. The goal of the Spartans is, and what I like to actually see from the movie Full Metal Jacket is, the UNSC didn't want machines. What they were looking for was the best soldier that they could make, and that's what it was. They kidnapped the kids very early on, and they pretty much disassociated all emotion from them, and everything that they would feel as a hindrance towards their goal of accomplishing their mission. So much so that when you get to games like Halo 4 and whatnot, the humanity of some of these Spartan 2s are being questioned. Now, that's not to say that's the same for some of the Spartans that we're seeing now in Halo 4 and 5. The Spartan 4s are different. They were soldiers who were so good that they were actually so invited, so to speak, to become Spartan 4s. And the genetically augmentation process is actually a lot safer than it was and can be performed on adults. It is stated early on that, by Dr. Halsey, that children's minds and bodies are much more adaptable to these augmentations. And if you don't know already, the augmentation survival rate for a lot of these kids was, I think it was like 33%. So, only a third of the kids that out of the original 75 recruits ever made it to be Spartan 2s. The ones that didn't, successfully make the augmentation process some of them were killed, some of them were left permanently paralyzed, some of them just became strategists and other things like that. So they are just the pinnacle, so to speak, of what you could be and the tactics that you can use. And their experience is what allows them to use those tactics appropriately and efficiently in the field, which just kind of makes them, the best.
Uh-huh.
I guess mentally that they could be. The physical augmentations and the armor are really what give them the other advantage, and the fact that they're just these guys are 7, 8 feet tall. I mean, they're monsters, and they're bigger than the average Marine compared to the Covenant, like the elites, who are also like 7 feet tall. Marines standing next to them, their only thing they want as much distance as possible from these guys, because I mean, in a one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat, a Marine's just gonna pretty much lose. I mean, short of Sergeant Forge and Halo Wars for anyone who knows what I'm talking about, but I mean, they're just outgunned physically, and their best method is just to use tactics, as you're so to speak, to do that. But Spartans don't necessarily have to do that. They can take them on one-on-one.
Now, something that leads on to this. So now we're talking about Halo, or Master Chief is a Spartan 2, correct?
Yeah.
So now we see in Halo 5 and 4 the other generation of Spartans. Now, how do they differ? Are they at a disadvantage compared to the Spartan 2s? Are they a better portion? Now, I know as far as my lore history goes, is that it's kind of like they're cheaper to produce, the newer Spartans. They're more, you can produce them at a higher rate than you could, and a more successful rate than you could with the Spartan 2s. Because I know, like you said, that a lot of them died at an early processing stage, whether it be when they were actually doing genetically augmentation, during training. So how does that play into do they differ at all, or
these kids, the Spartan 2s, again, were trained as kids. They're 6 years old. They were abducted, and there were clones put in their place so that no one would ever know that they disappeared. So beyond the fact that they have the age difference, even if you took a Spartan 2 and what you're referring to in Halo 4 and 5, which are Spartan 4s, just the age difference of experience is also there. From 6 to 18 is 12 years of experience, maybe not necessarily in the field, but actual just everyday training for these kids. So that's kind of already one advantage that they have. As you stated, and as I kind of mentioned before, the augmentation process for Spartan 4s is much safer. Not so to speak that there's really a comparison level. I mean, by the point the Spartan 4s are introduced in Halo 4, and when they are in the Halo timeline, I mean, the Spartan 2s have years. I mean, 30 years of training on these guys. Yeah, it wouldn't really even be, I would say, comparable, but that doesn't mean these Spartan 4s aren't soldiers. Doesn't mean that they're not, still Spartans. A lot of people don't view them as such, but in fact, in the Halo universe, they're the first, I would say, UNSC supported and backed group that they really publicized the Spartan 4s. And there's a middle stage there with the Spartan 3s, where, as you were saying, the cost of producing them. In fact, the Spartan 3s were not made by Dr. Halsey at all. They were made by a gentleman named Colonel Ackerton, and Colonel Ackerton, he took everything from the Spartan 2s and wanted to mass produce it. And pretty much, instead of having the Mjolnir armor that you see in with all the Spartan 2s and the Spartan 4s, you actually see what's called the SPI, or spy armor, and it's a kind of a torn down version of the Mjolnir armor, so that it's been able to be mass produced, but it's not as effective in many places. And so that's kind of where they were at with that, where they wanted to figure out a methodology of making things cheaper, but instead they went with a quantity over quality effect. And with the Spartan 4s, they kind of hope to remove that, and all they do is they take the best of the best. It's kind of like the Navy SEALs, but because the UNSC is the Navy, and they allowed them to be Spartans, which then on top of already being the best of the best, they received the genetic augmentations as well as the extra training.
Okay, so those later generation of Spartans aren't necessarily at a disadvantage, but based off of solely combat experience, the Spartan 2s would have them beat in that sense, in that
Yeah,
category.
just I mean, the Spartan twos were there throughout the entire Human Covenant War, which I mean lasts over 30 years, I believe. Yeah, because 25, 55 would be 30 years. Contact Harvest. Yeah, I mean, it's just yeah, it's crazy. 30 years of experience. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of these Spartan twos have been in cryo, like Spartan Jerome, Douglas, and Alice, that are on Halo Wars and the Spirit of Fire for the really extensive lore guys.
I got you.
They've been in cryogenic sleep pretty much since I believe it's 2531.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been out. While they have that, the experience up until that point, they do not have the full on 30 years experience like Chief and a lot of some of the other Spartan twos that made it do.
Okay. And with these also kind of almost going into this next question, with these later generation of Spartans, are they more human than you would say than the Spartan 2s?
So yeah, that's a big Halo 4 topic that you're talking about there. The humanity of what they do to the Spartan twos with Dr. Halsey and what she committed. I mean, there are kids that were in the Spartan 2 program that that they ranged. John, who is Master Chief, actually takes it very well. He realizes very quickly that I need to become a soldier. This is what I'm doing, and he accepts it, becomes a leader, and chooses to be a part of the team. But there are actually some other Spartans, which these Spartans become known as Spartan Gray Team,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually don't get along very well. They don't get along at
Damn.
all. They repetitively try to escape the facility on Reach where the Spartans are being trained. All the way up until the point pretty much where they become Spartans. And what they eventually do is the three of those guys end up becoming Gray Team, and they operate behind enemy lines, the Covenant enemy lines, and they don't report back for months on end, years on end, and they're very against that. And there are some other individuals which, if you watch the Halo Legends short films is what I would say, the short animations,
Mm-hmm.
where there is a Spartan Daisy 23, and she also tries to escape with another recruit named Ralph. And they unsuccessfully they get away from the planet and they try to go home, but Daisy runs into her Flash clone, which is a very interesting story and is very, I guess, eye-opening and very the first time you get to see what that's like, where one of the Spartan 2s, not even I would say a full-grown adult yet, runs into her Flash clone, and then these Flash clones are supposed to die immediately within like a year of being cloned. Otherwise, they would use the clones for the Spartans. But she actually runs into her years later, and her family was wealthy enough to keep this clone alive. So yeah, I mean, it is a very I would say there are some Spartans with Master Chief who have like what they believe is PTSD. One of the things that this interrogator at the beginning of Halo 4 is asking Dr. Halsey is, do you believe that the Master Chief succeeded at everything he did? Because at his core, he's broken. He's not even a human being. He's a machine. And the Spartan 4s, I mean, these guys are doing it for, the reason because they want to be there. Not that, the Spartan 2s don't want to be there, but, they were kind of, it was kind of forced on them. And that's also a topic that, when Cortana is going rampant, she brings up to Chief. She's like, well, do you know how Dr. Halsey made you? Gave you the gift of being a Spartan. A lot of them didn't really see it as a gift, but just eventually understood that this is my job and this is what I have to do. So
Now, yeah, see, so that's what I was thinking is like, you kind of answered my question that I was gonna ask is like, so genetically, what does that do to your morals? Because basically, and this is kind of diving into the rabbit hole of I guess you consider it psychology, is how much does this genetic augmentation change you as a person? Because I feel like what bases what you feel kind of just on day-to-day interactions, whether it kind of goes into the core of what causes PTSD. And it's like it's a lot of people that associate with PTSD as a traumatic experience. So, how much does that genetic augmentating, change that, what you see as a traumatic experience? Because, and PTSD doesn't necessarily mean you see some dude get blown up and that changes you forever. For some people, it could be running over a cat, and that causes PTSD.
Yeah,
And
it's just a traumatic event, is what it is. It
so
doesn't necessarily have to be war or anything like that.
now that's interesting that you say that there was cases of other Spartan 2s that, show some traits of humanity and show some, like, remorse in a sense. Because, it really shows that, yes, it genetically augmentates their physical strength. Now, how much of mental strength and mental, I guess, how much does it change their mental thought process is what I should say. And you saying that, it's kind of different from case to case, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as
So,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, but you finish, please. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's good, man. Because, like, it's an interesting topic because it's like, it's almost a catch-22. You get some cases like Master Chief to where, like, at first, depending on where you're going off of, whether it be the books or I actually got a chance while I was flying here watching on Netflix, the little mini, not really, it was like a little
Fall
movie.
Of Reach.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Fall of Reach. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
if you base your information off of that, when you're watching it, you do see some of the other Spartans training with him kind of show some traits of, like, morality, or, like, because, if you go back to the Art of War and you read the Art of War, it actually says, what makes a good soldier is, pretty much you have no morals. You do what you're told, and the end of story. And
So
you can see that in Master Chief because he automatically, immediately, very quickly becomes the leader in that situation, and in a lot of these situations, and a lot of them come to Master Chief as like, hey, I don't know, and he's like, nah, fam, we're gonna get this mission done, and we're gonna get it done. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like that's it. Like there is no, you have no voice. This is what is gonna happen.
the chief is the commanding officer at the time, and going all the way back from the beginning of your question, yeah, these kids, when they actually, Dr. Halsey selected these kids individually. Mm-hmm. She went out, and Dr. Halsey is an individual who has an IQ of 200. So you have to kind of, have a suspension of disbelief and say that, okay, she is above our, thinking level. Sometimes she sees things that we don't. She handpicked these first 75 recruits to be Spartan 2s. So she honestly believed that a lot of them were going to, were already had the mental toughness to do that. And in fact, one of them, I forget the name of the Spartan right now, but his parents die in an outer colony, and he actually manages to hike, something like 100 kilometers to get back. And he's only 6 years old, so she knew that he had the mental toughness to do that. And the whole point of the conditioning, I mean, these kids are conditioned like boot camp every single day leading up to their genetic augmentations. So, very quickly, in the Fall of Reach will show you that there were some kids that were weeded out in the training before the augmentations ever began. But the mental requirements needed in order to get through that augmentation was part of the training that was there. So they were conditioned to see each other as brothers and sisters in arms, and they knew to never betray each other, to always have your team's back, and to make sure that you follow through with the mission. And furthermore, with the attitude that's, like you said, Chief says, he says, no, we are not going to fail simply because I said we are not going to fail. He comes up with a solution, and he doesn't waste time feeling sorry for himself. He doesn't waste time with anything like that. He's almost like a machine. And so, a lot of the kids, I wouldn't say were kind of they were kind of on like a metaphysical level above Chief in thinking that, I would say their selfishness a little bit, the ones that were trying to escape. They knew kind of what had happened to them. They knew what was going on, and they knew it wasn't okay. But how the kids chose to compartmentalize with it was something that was kind of unpredictable. And so, yes, I mean, later kind of in the series, especially with Chief, pretty much the leader of the Spartan 2s, and pretty much all the Spartans, he's having some severe issues now trying to figure out what he is. Is he a machine? Is he a man? Is he how does that work? And Dr. Halsey, gave Cortana to Chief, or actually sent it with Noble Team so they could find the first Halo ring.
Mm-hmm.
And Chief formulates a bond with her like everything else. And I'm pretty sure that this will lead into some other questions that a lot of individuals have, is kind of what is their relationship and why does it differ from any of his brothers and sisters? Why did he not get that involved with his brothers and sisters, or why does he not kind of have an intimate relationship with anyone else?
Now,
so yeah,
the only reason, and this is my theory and my take on it, whether it's a developer thing because to make them more and more relatable, but my personal opinion is with his brothers in arms, it's kind of like a coworker. Like when you go to work, you get the job done, you go home. I mean, sometimes you make a great friend as a coworker, but most of the time it's like you're there to do a job, you get the job done, you leave. And I feel
they all understand that. Yeah,
and
I
feel like the brotherhood,
that.
like they're all they got their little different quirks. The group of Spartan 2s that made it through training and actually went and fought the Covenant. But I feel like they all kind of were in the same mentality, like let's get the job done. But like with Cortana, like I feel like that's the first person that Master Chief in his entire life has always been there, like 24/7, and two, kind of has like a footstep into intimate talking. Someone
she is connected, neurologically into his brain, so you kind of can tell what his thoughts are and stuff like that as well.
Whether that's right or wrong, I feel that's just like I said, it's just my opinion.
No, that's legitimate opinion. And as an individual who doesn't play as much Halo, Bungie or 343 now needed to be able to kind of translate that over to you.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know that somehow. And I feel like that's probably a great theory. Like you say, it's a coworker. That the first thing for Chief, and he says it, is get the job done, protect humanity, whatever the cost. And Cortana isn't really like that. Cortana's in his head.
Mm-hmm.
He can protect Cortana by staying alive himself and making sure nothing happens. And that'll go into Halo 4 and what happens there, and things like that again. But yeah, that's a good theory. I really do like that, and I really feel that should be translated over effectively by 343 now, and why Chief is going so out of whack, out of his normal character for Cortana, compared to anyone like on Blue Team, or any of his other brothers and sisters.
So we've been this past few little minutes. We've been talking about pretty much, Master Chief in the Spartan 2s, the strategies, and, basically how their humanity co-inflicts with, this amazing strength and very strategic way of thinking. So now let's kind of look at the other side with the Covenant. So what is their, social structure like compared to the humans, and how does that, coincide with their military structure? Like what is that?
I guess how does it work is what you're asking. How do the Covenant work? Foundationally.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Covenant operate off of a hierarchy system. You have individuals like the Grunts and the Jackals and the Buggers, if you know what those are. They're the little flying drones that go around. Those guys are like at the bottom. They're very low on the tiers, and they don't get much. I believe the actual rank is the drones, and the Ungoi or the Grunts are like at the very, very bottom. They're like the labor workers. They get screwed having to do everything. The Jackals or Kigyar are one step above that. And then despite whether you're playing like Halo 2, Halo 3 and stuff like that, you're going to have at different times, the Hunters play into effect, the Elites play into effect, and the Brutes eventually come in. But the Covenant itself, kind of back in Halo 2, Halo 1, 2, and 3 days and everything before that, have 3 prophets at any given time, and they have an age of something, and it'll be like the age of reclamation, or a different age that defines the covenant in its period and the new prophets that are there. And there are always 3 prophets. During the time of contact harvest, which is where the humans first meet the covenant, the new age of the covenant actually changes over as the new 3 truth, mercy, and regret are brought into power. And in the book Contact Harvest, you can kind of get a feel for what the hierarchy is like. I mean, the grunts have to be crammed on pretty much like equivalent to like buses or like planes that go around High Charity, if you remember in Halo 2. And I mean, they're crammed. These guys are like already like falling off and stuff like that, and they're, you know, they're pretty much they're low tier. You know, they're struggling to do anything. The jackals are, you know, 1 tier above that, and you know, and then you'll have the I guess you'll go into like the hunters, and the elites are kind of, the hunters are below the elites, and some of the elites are on what's called a council that is shared with the prophets and the elites, and these guys decide pretty much everything with the prophets themselves, the actual 3 prophets. I believe the prophets' race name is called the Sanshayum, and the elites' race name is called the Sangheili. And so the Sangheili and the Sanshayum kind of, they're at the top. And originally, those 2 were the first 2 that formulated the covenant, because the prophet race, the Sanshayum, actually had Forerunner technology and were able to beat the elites. And eventually they formulated a truce that said the elites will be the warriors and the Sanshayum will be the technology wielders and the users and the deciphering of like the Forerunner technology. And then there were things like, you know, big events in the covenant, like the taming of the hunters, when they incorporated the hunter, the Grunt Rebellion, when grunts were upset with how they were being treated, and they were incorporated, and things like that. So where they fall in category actually affects their every day-to-day life. It is definitely a hierarchical system that is, depending on your class, that's how everything goes on. And you can't really jump class. It's very hard, and they make some mentions of it in the book. You know, there are ranks that overlap each other, but, you know, foundationally, you know, you have an elite that's, you know, holding a squad of grunts, and or, you know, jackals and things like that, and they send them out. You know, they're the commander of what's going on, and each of those have their own class tiers and things like that. Now, some of them have special roles, but it's never really huge changes or anything like that.
So, okay, now let's be real here. In the games, you kind of see, like, it almost feels like they're all, like, their entire society is, like, just one giant military role. Is it like that, or do they, like, you know, do they have a watch change, you know, or, like, they get relieved, they go back home to the old apartment and fucking say hi to their...
Well, they definitely, they have families, and, you know, some of the highest ranking have families in High Charity, because High Charity is the holy city of the Covenant. But most of these races are actually on their home worlds, and, or, you know, on ships or things like that. A lot of them are out on either cruisers, whether they're, yeah, and stuff like that. And so they're, I guess the way to say it is, they are strictly militarized, but their singular goal is to serve the prophets, and, you know, I guess whatever their goal is, the prophets decide what everyone is doing, and it just flows down from there.
So their society's almost like, you know, ancient Japan society, to where, like, you know, it's very for the emperor, you know, like, you know, it's feudalism. Not, yeah, it's
like a feudalism, except for you don't really pay the prophets anything other than your time, and you're sort of slaved in. You don't really have a choice. You know, there are some races that have some say, but no, you don't really have choice. If you're part of this, you know, if you're incorporated into the covenant, yeah, you're kind of screwed. So
now, so with that being said, you know, these guys ain't machines. You know, they kind of are normal, whatever they are, insects, mammals, reptilian things.
Yeah, they range.
So,
yeah.
like, was there any, you know, actually we do see that in Halo 2, kind of like a civil war in a sense. Has there been other incidents of that, like with grunts, or like with brutes, with even the elites trying to take over things? Like, is it, or has it for a long time always been this system?
Okay, that's earlier is what I was referring to were some of those events. The Grunt Rebellion is where the grunts are unsatisfied with how they're being treated and where they're at in rank, and their high numbers and their quick reproduction rate gave them an ability to try to outnumber. And there was actually an arbiter that came in, and part of what the arbiter's
The
job
arbiter.
is the right hand of the prophets. Yeah, he comes in and he's supposed to help with that time of, they mentioned in Halo 2, they were there for the times of extraordinary crisis. Again, same thing with the hunters. The hunters, the Letgolo was their actual name. They were tamed originally by an arbiter, and they originally didn't have the armor that you see them with. They use things like rocks and stuff from their moon that they're from. So yeah,
creatures.
there have been many, and the one that you see in Halo 2 is known as the Great Schism or the Great Schism. I know it's said both ways, and I don't want to offend anyone that says it that way. I personally say it's schism, and that's how I'm going to continue saying it. But in Halo 2, you see what's known as the Great Schism for the Covenant. And it's the event where Truth, which is I guess, the leader of the three prophets that you currently see, and the book Contact Harvest will give you kind of why he's such a bad dude, and why he kind of, everything he says just kind of goes. There's a lot of backstory there. But at one point, one of the prophets is killed, and I believe it is Regret. He's killed in Halo 2. You get up on his chair, and you give him a good old right hook to the face,
Yeah.
and he goes down in his chair, and the Covenant fire on your position as chief, and that is part of a mission in Halo 2. But when that happens, at that point, Truth uses that, I guess, that excuse of a prophet dying in order to change the guard. Because back what I was saying earlier, the first two races of the Covenant were the Sanshayum and the Sangheili, which are the elites and the prophets. And the elites were designated that they were always going to be the warriors and the protectors, and the prophets always said, okay, we will hold the technology, we will hold the I guess the scientific side of things. And when that happens, Truth says, you know what, no, we're going to recommission the guard, and now they're all going to be brutes, which pretty much means that the brutes, who were earlier in, I guess, the series, ever since Contact Harvest, which is the beginning of the Human Covenant War, have been ascending the class tiers very rapidly. I mean, they quickly outsmart and out muscle the grunts and the jackals and everything. I mean, short of the hunters and the elites, they don't have a lot of competition. And so at that moment, it was kind of like the elites were being pushed down a class tier and were very upset. And then what eventually happens is, and you see this in Halo 3 ODST and stuff like that, Truth secretly kind of goes out and starts getting rid of a lot of the elites. Because in Halo 2, there is an elite, which 343 Guilty Spark, the monitor from Halo 1, meets, and he lets him know that what Truth is doing is wrong. That he's actually just going to kill them all, that Halo doesn't actually send them on their great journey. They don't start that. And so the brutes just blindly follow orders, while the elites are very honor-based, and they kind of think for themselves a lot better. And Truth doesn't want that. Truth wants mindless soldiers that are just going to do what he says when he says it, because that's the pack mentality that the brutes operate off of. And you end up getting, the Great Schism, where Truth pretty much turns the brutes against the elites, and he's just like, kill them, go for it. And they start slaughtering them, and at one point, all of the elites are very confused, because there's times where Truth is saying, no, it's Tartarus, the leader of the brutes, who's saying to do this, not me, kill them, elites. And there are times where she says to the brutes, they can't guarantee our safety, their time is over, and the brutes are now in power. So there are many events, and the biggest being, I believe, the Great Schism, which is kind of believed to be one of the reasons why the Covenant weren't so strong and humanity was able to hold them off. But that's more lore.
So there
and
was
other
some
topics.
social, turmoil that kind of did not help them in this, when they're fighting the humans.
Yeah, there's definitely internal turmoil inside the Covenant. You can't really have a race or a mix of races that big without eventually having something go on.
Jeremy, a question I am dying to know is, who was leading the Grunt Rebellion, And two, did they use like Soviet tactics to where they just like swarmed their like emphasis on the Soviet freaking national anthem, like freaking just storming the trenches and shit? Like, was that their tactic? Was there any success in this rebellion, or was it quickly eliminated?
So, the Grunt Rebellion is kind of something that is, I wouldn't say it's extensively covered, but it's there. It was initiated by something called the Infusion Incident, wherein the Ungoi population at High Charity put pressure on the Jackals, who they actually have to share, I guess, like a living quarters and stuff like that. And after like a lot of years without them being, kind of at each other's necks, they eventually, their mortality rate was just higher, and the Kigyar, the Jackals, their birth rate was declining. So as the Kigyar, the Jackals, who were upset, kind of what happened with them is they actually poisoned the infusion resources that the Ungoi use, which are like recreational, like breathing rooms, because the grunts actually use methane. They breathe methane, which are farts. Yeah, pretty funny. But yeah, they use that, and so then they brought it to the Covenant, kind of like the ministry that says we need you to handle this. The ministry pretty much just said it's going to be. They brought it to the ministry. They said there's going to be penalties, but they weren't very, I guess, happy with that. It wasn't properly solved.
Mm-hmm.
And so what eventually happened was that the Ungoi, like as a whole, they were like, no, we're at the bottom tier. We're not getting enough attention. They started attacking everything. Okay. And so they, on High Charity, went out through, they started attacking everything. So what eventually happened was, I think it's in like the Age of Doubt is when it is what comes of it, is the Age of Doubt, because it shows that like when properly motivated, the Ungoi are like the grunts are like super vicious and like little, I don't know, chupacabras is the best way to describe them, especially like in close quarter combat. Like despite them being not very skillful alone, their mass numbers are crazy. And so what ended up happening was the Covenant. I wish we could
see that in the games. Is like massive amounts of them. Like I'm not talking like 10 or 5. I'm talking like a couple of hundred.
Well, there's actually Grunt Apocalypse, which is a game mode in Halo Reach, and where all you do is fight grunts and just like endless waves of them, and that's what happens. And so the end of all that is the Covenant threatened to glass the Ungoi homeworld, but they kind of were like, okay, no, we won't do that anymore. So they don't do it, and at that point, that was the end of it. So I wouldn't say there was like a really like leader, mm-hmm. But that's kind of what the whole Grunt Rebellion was and what caused it.
Okay, so now this goes into like the next thing I want to ask is, you have, you kind of explained the history of what the Covenant is, and how come they didn't, they're fighting the humans, like, and what was like causing their such big hatred, and why didn't they, it's been going on for years, why didn't they just say, you know what, these guys are putting up a good fight, it would be better to have them on our side than it would be not to have them on there? Or if that's the case, did they try doing that? Like, I'm not too sure. Like,
no,
if
it's completely understandable. And again, Contact Harvest, I really recommend you guys reading this book, and I would read it in chronological order, so I'd read the other Halo books before this. It explains a lot of this, and it explains why the Covenant are just so relentless against humanity. The Covenant view humanity as an affront to their gods. The Covenant believe that humanity is the unrightful owner and claimer of all Forerunner technology and things like that, and that they're trying to take it. Upon first contact, when the Brutes and the Covenant first meet the humans on Contact Harvest, the Brutes use these things called, and all Covenant do, these things called luminaries. And what they do is they seek out and find Forerunner artifacts. But what ended up actually happening is The brutes find the world harvest, which is an agricultural world solely based for the purpose of agriculture. It makes food for other planets, and it's a very, very far out system from the inner colonies. It's one of the most far out ones. However, it is extremely important. When the brutes find the humans, they believe that the humans are actually hiding artifacts from from the Covenant. And the brutes know that if you bring Forerunner artifacts back, especially in the mass quantity that they see on this luminary on Harvest, that they would be promoted, and they would be riddled with just I guess just riches and promotions, and would have everything that they wanted. The problem is that, and for all of you guys that don't want to know this in the book, is that there's an issue with the luminary and its translation. And short of not ruining the whole book for you, there are no Forerunner artifacts on Harvest, but the luminary is mistranslating something. And come to find out, it's that mistranslation is the same reason why the three prophets that we see in the games, which are Truth, Regret, and Mercy, are the prophets that are currently in power. They know something that the rest of the Covenant don't. And it's actually seen and hinted at through a lot of the games when you see that only humans can activate Forerunner technology. So it's actually that the three prophets will never allow the humans to be part of the Covenant, because if they did, they would expose them for something that they know.
Oh, I see. I see. Now that explains a lot. That was a pretty solid answer to. Now, what gives, man? They've been fighting the Covenant. Obviously the Covenant has way better. I wouldn't say way better, but technologically, I feel like they're superior in some departments. Mm-hmm. So like, why the heck hasn't the humans either reverse engineer the Covenant weapons and or make hybrid weapons? Why are they still shooting projectile weapons? Why are they still black powder is obviously bullets? Why is this
is a huge thing. I wouldn't say it's huge in the Halo community, but if you go back into it, there are guys that have talked about this, and this question's been asked a number of times. So the end-all be-all thing is that even in the commentary for the Halo 1 and 2, if you have Halo 3 Essentials, which is a disc that actually came with the Halo 3 Legendary Edition, on that disc there is a Halo 1 and 2 all cutscenes and video that you can watch where it's all the Halo 1, all the Halo 2 cutscenes, and it's actually Marty O'Donnell, Jason Jones, and I forget who the third guy is, and I feel bad for it because he is just absolutely crucial. He's like the holy trinity to Halo. But they discuss why 500 years in the future, we're still using projectile weapons. And it's also mentioned in the first book. To be honest, there really is no reason. Humanity, yes, it is a lack. And the only real answer that I can give you as a real world answer is that the game developers probably wanted you to identify more with the UNSC by them using projectile weapons. Now, don't get me wrong, they definitely have to play with that now that it's on the playing field. Covenant have shields, Covenant have plasma weaponry, and plasma weaponry is just devastating to anything electronic and will just absolutely destroy skin. So there are instances like the Mjolnir armor, which is the Spartan 2 armor, that actually use reverse engineered Covenant technology. They do use it appropriately. And later, if the ship, the UNSC Infinity, which is the ship that you see in Halo 4, they actually reverse engineer Forerunner technology. But short of the elites and the ships and a few other instances, there isn't really a lot of a disadvantage to using projectile weaponry. The only time that it's really bad is when you're face to face with an elite, or especially where humanity lost a lot was in space. The shields that the Covenant ships had in space just absolutely destroyed and just devastated humanity's ships. regular UNSC ships. They actually have this thing called the MAC cannon, which is the mass accelerated cannon, I believe is what it is. It's pretty much like a rail gun. It's a giant rail gun, and that was one of the best tools that the UNSC had against these Covenant, because nukes wouldn't do anything against their ships. And what this pretty much was is we're just going to hurl a giant piece of mass at them really fast, and that usually would do the trick. Now, sometimes it definitely wouldn't, and the best thing you can do is catch a Covenant ship without its shields up. But for the elites, and what eventually happened to the Spartan armor, and what you'll notice in game, is that you actually have a shield in the Halo games. You're not really your health bar, but you have a shield bar that shows you where your shield is at, and that's actually reverse engineered technology from the Covenant that they're able to use. And more or less, there are some other things that come in here. They're, like smaller things, but I wouldn't say so much so as weaponry. There's not really a lot of weaponry that's been reverse engineered, because they don't really see a huge need for it. Now, don't get me wrong, it would be very easy to do that, but one of the rules that actually the Covenant are not allowed to do is use human weaponry, which is, I guess, kind of at an advantage, because I'm not going to lie, I think I'd rather be shot at by plasma bolts that I can see coming at me rather than, bullets or projectiles, because I, one, don't have a shield, so it's not like, plasma is going to do any more effect, towards me, and two, at least I can see the bolt coming at me, and I have somewhat of a chance. I guess the muzzle flash on a bolt is kind of continuous. It's more like a tracer round. So, yeah, it was kind of more of like an identifying with the UNSC originally, and eventually that played into just, it was okay, they're going to make it work, and they continue to make it work. Yeah, I mean, the answer to that question is it's just kind of debated. It'd be kind of hard to identify with, the UNSC and Spartans if they didn't use fun guns, I think is how the Halo 3 Essential commentary put it. So...
I see. Now, okay, you got to tell me this, Jeremy. So, when in battle, or like when a government is at war with anybody, you have to think of logistics. And with logistics, like, how are they going to pay for something? How are they going to get the funds for this? How are they going to get those said things to the battlefield or the battle place? So who's paying for this UNC? Like, I know it's kind of like a giant UN, like everyone, it's like one government. So like, is it like a communist government? Is it is their economic system a capitalist system to where like it's a free market? Like, or is everyone's working for the common goal? How is it laid out?
This leads into some bigger concepts in Halo. So originally, prior to the Human Covenant War, what existed was the Unified Earth Government. And this was a representative democracy, and it was Earth and all of its colonies. Now, you kind of have to imagine it, and it really is how it is Earth is in the very center. And you have the inner colonies and the outer colonies. The outer colonies it's also like a hierarchy system. The closer you are to Earth, the better you are at, the better off you are. The more money you have, the better, the better things are for you entirely. So the goal there, for most people, is to just try to get as close as you can to Earth, try to get as much as you can. And when the war kicks in, the Human Covenant War, originally, people don't see it as bad as it needs to be. And a lot of the propaganda that you'll see in the games, they'll show Earth and they'll show fight for her and things like that. And one of the big issues in Halo is that these outer colonies immediately get abandoned by the UNSC, because the UNSC actually takes over once the Human Covenant War gets to a point where they realize that it's a bigger issue than they can deal with. And these outer colonies that are left become insurrectionists, because they're like, well, we just got abandoned by our own government. We're supposed to fight, we're supposed to do everything we can to protect Earth because it's the cradle of humanity, but honestly, I'm worried about the here and now with me. They just left me to the Covenant, and the Covenant, view all of humanity as enemies. They will just kill you. They'll glass, which is pretty much using excavation drills to literally melt the core, not the core, but the crust of whatever planet you're on, till it's rock hard and it looks like glass. So these outer colonies just get glassed over and over and over again, and all of the money, all of the resources and everything that is from the inner colonies and Earth is what's used in order to send out and try to keep the Covenant at bay in the outer colonies. Now, they very quickly use the outer colonies within a decade, and the inner colonies are, a real fight and grind for the UNSC. And eventually, again, leading into logistics and money and stuff, eventually they realize, again, it's an all-out war. The UNSC have now taken over, and they're not having to pay money for anything, and it just becomes absolutely pretty much we're doing this to survive. Get on the train and do this, because if you don't, we're not going to live. So a lot of it is really bad, and believe it or not, the insurrectionists, there are some pockets out there that are still like that, and when they are once the Human Covenant War ends and humanity continues out into, or heads back out into the outer colonies, a lot of the insurrectionists are pissed, because they're like, well, you left us to die, and there's really no excuse for that. Why are we supposed to reincorporate with the government that left us to die? So really, there's no specifics, I would say, on the money and logistics, other than the closer you are to Earth, the better off you are, because Earth is the cradle of humanity, and it's the most desirable place to be, and most people aren't born on Earth. They're born in the inner or the outer colonies, and they're not given the same benefits and things that you are as you're closer to Earth.
Okay, so there is some rebellion, and so what exactly type of government would you say it is at this point? Would it be more, now that there's a bigger threat, and like you said, those parts of the colonies were abandoned, so they're kind of like insurrectionists, like they don't really identify with the UN, NSC.
Mm-hmm.
So would they is their government now taking more of a step out of the direction of democracy, to where it's like, hey, we're gonna make decisions for the better good of everybody? Or is it
it's kind of more like a socialist type thing at that point, because it definitely they definitely take control over what humanity is doing at one point, because eventually, after they lose the planet called Reach, and Reach is the biggest and most militarized planet there is besides Earth. Once they lose Reach, pretty much the moral of humanity just went down the drain. Reach was kind of like the last stronghold before the Covenant were going to find Earth. And so by that point, by the time they're attacking Reach, it was just, the UNSC is just like, nope, get out of the way. We're making decisions. We're doing it for the betterment of this. And one of the biggest things that they have is, for the military, things like what's known as the Cole Protocol, which are methods and ways of retreating so that the Covenant don't know how to trace it back to Earth and the inner colonies. You're not allowed to retreat at a direct line back to where the source of humanity is, because they don't want you to give it up. It's the only real secret that humanity has.
Okay. So, something of a last kind of bit question before we, kick off the end of this podcast. We talked about logistics. We talked about all this. What is the population of the human race at this point? Because it has to be in like way past the trillions, because we see them get massacred on an unprecedented, I would believe, an unprecedented scale.
No, it definitely is.
And
yeah, it definitely is.
That leads to my last question is, what were the major battles? Like, did we have any ground forces on ground forces clashing, and what were the casualties like? Was it an absolute victory on the human side? Was it a close victory? Was it more of a victory on the Covenant side? Like, do explain that, because that's something that, like, I see, and especially with, looking at modern battles now, we use, aircraft, we use, you don't see too many casualties anymore. So is it kind of like that now, or is it more like World War One, World War Two, to where like we're losing thousands of humans?
Okay, so yeah, 22nd century hits and Earth is overpopulated. I mean, it's the whole reason why they have to go out and colonize. And like you're saying, the Human Covenant War, it's death on a unprecedented level. It's the estimates are like 39 billion humans are dead, and that's after 27 years of war, like with just pretty much just genocide. So I mean, it's absolutely crazy that, or sorry, not 39 billion dead. I wrote this down here because I knew you were going to ask some of these questions. It was 39 billion humans total, and they believe that 23 billion are dead, with 16 billion remaining. So it's over half of all humanity that gets killed in this
Damn.
in this huge war. Yeah, I mean, it's more than we can even fathom because there's only about, I think it's like 7 to 8 billion right now on Earth. And some of these guys were, I mean, with the outer colonies and things like that, killed by the millions at a time. These glassings where the Covenant would just use excavation beams from their ships in space and literally just melt people to death. I mean, they say in some of the Halo 5 terminals and audio logs that you find, they dig up people that were glassed. And yeah, it's absolutely crazy, how much this is. And as you're saying, so what were some of the biggest battles? Like, I would say the real biggest battles that there were things like Harvest. Harvest was fought over for years. It was, like I said, the agricultural center of humanity, and they needed that kind of food and stuff. And so when Harvest went, I mean, they spent in Halo Wars at the beginning. If you listen, they spent 5 years trying to get Harvest back. They need Harvest. They need it for agricultural purposes and things like that. And plenty of people have died out there trying to get it. Other big ones were like Reach. When Reach fell, I mean, that was the last stronghold of humanity. Killed again millions, billions. Absolutely crazy. So by the time we reach, the end of Halo 3, and I would say where we're at now with Halo 5, it being, I think, 2557, 2558, it's, I wouldn't say they've grown too much. I'd say we're probably sitting under the 20 billion mark, which is still, half or barely coming up on half of humans that there were prior to the Human Covenant War.
That's crazy, so, dude. Like, that is...
Yeah, it's a very, I guess it would be like a very mind-numbing thing you would have to do thinking about it before.
I just can't imagine, like, dude, I just can't even imagine how cramped it is on Earth. Like, everywhere must be like a major city. Like,
yeah, eventually that is what happens. It becomes crammed, and the need to expand goes out, and so they start interplanetary colonization, and a lot of conflicts actually arise from it. What's known as the Shao Fujikawa Translite Engine or slip space drive is made, which allows them to go faster than light. And even then, dude, it didn't matter. And Halo Legends will tell you this if you watch that again. It didn't matter how far or how fast they could run from each other. It was pretty much just impossible. There was always war within humanity as well, but they were always still expanding. They were always still trying to go out, and eventually, again, what became of a lot of those wars was that Earth was the cradle. I wouldn't say at that point it was extremely overpopulated, but living there was very, very, very expensive. And then things like the magnetic accelerator cannon and stuff like that were all developments of things that came of those wars. So,
okay, something that is interesting me, like, is something that's piquing my interest, is in Harvest. You're saying they're fighting over 5 years, and you look at World War One. You had obvious like very, very obvious front lines. Like, the enemy's over there, we're right here. Get to this objective, take it. And as we see time progresses in our own reality, we see that gap of covering ground is extended rapidly. Whereas in World War One, it took them, 4 years to cover like 5 miles of ground. And then you look at
With
World War
trench warfare
Two,
and stuff
and
like
they're
that. Yeah.
covering hundreds of miles in months. And then now you're covering thousands of miles in just a few days. How is that translated in this battle for a harvest? Is there
So
defined
yeah,
front lines? Is it
it's
kind of
it's
scattered, like random
there's
skirmishes?
really it's really probably I would say continental is how I describe it, but you have to remember as well there's a space aspect to it, which is something that we can't really
Fathom?
grasp a hold of. Yeah, we can't fathom yet. You when you're on the ground, you can only be on the ground for so long, and it's said that you do not hold that position until you are standing over it, which I believe is 100% true. And the big thing about Harvest was that humanity can win the ground war at heavy costs, but they can win. What they can't win is in space. And so humanity can win on the ground. They can go, they can take places, but they can't really hold them very well sometimes because they'll just get attacked from space. They'll just have excavation beams and glassing and fired on from space. And if you can't win, in space, it's kind of hard to win on the ground. So the fronts are constantly changing. And at one point you might be at one part on the Earth, or not on the Earth, but on the planet. At one point you might be on a totally another part. And so Halo Wars kind of addressed that I guess that question you have there. They made mobile bases that can move and deploy from and things like that. And sometimes you had big setup bases, but in the end you still have to cover your ass in the air, because if you don't, you'll get glassed. You'll get hit by an excavation beam.
And, looking at what you said earlier with how the only reason, really, or not the only reason, but a major reason why we won that war was because the social turmoil within the Covenant. Now, say that didn't happen. How long do you think this war would have went on?
So had the Covenant not brought up, or had the prophets not committed the Great Schism, and their only goal was to just wipe through, and let's say that there was no I guess reason at all for the Covenant to possibly believe that the prophets were lying, with Spark telling the truth, and the Arbiter never existed. Let's just say that instead of in Halo 2 there was a totally different route. The council who voted to have the Arbiter's corpse hung and then paraded through the city, that happened. Never became the Arbiter, never knew anything. And let's say that the individual that you find on the level, the Arbiter in Halo 2, which is another, they call him the heretic leader because he's spreading it. Let's say he never existed either. If the Covenant were just totally as they were at the beginning of Halo 2, or let's say in Halo 1, and just kept going, I would say that they wouldn't have lasted a year. They wouldn't have lasted a year, because the whole reason that the Covenant are at Earth in Halo 2 are because one of the prophets, Regret, found a Forerunner object that led him there. And then he also finds another piece that takes him to what's known as Installation 05 or Delta Halo. But at that point, the Covenant know that humanity's on Earth. They don't know that it's their last planet that they have. They don't know it's the last stronghold. And that's why they're kind of caught off guard, and Cortana makes mention of it on the mission outskirts when you're driving through the tunnels. But eventually, the Covenant would have arrived there. It would have been absolutely terrible. It would have been a massacre. And there's actually, in the book First Strike, it would have been even worse than it was before. And I know I'm not going to ruin that book at all, but there was something else that was coming, Covenant-wise, that would have been bad. And you also have to remember that there was the Flood as well. There was a flood outbreak in Halo 3, which meant that the Flood possibly also knew and relayed where Earth was. So without anyone, let's say, going to the Ark with Truth and stopping that, it could have been entirely possible that Truth would have just activated the rings and sent everyone, to oblivion. Or before that, because even as we see in Halo 3 at the beginning of Halo 3, they're already losing the war. You left in Halo 2, and the rest of the Covenant fleet pretty much arrives, and they're not winning. They're getting beat pretty hard.
Yeah, man. They were, and I honestly feel like like you're saying, they were. I feel like it would gone a lot longer than just 3 years. Like I feel like it would gone like 30 years, 40 years. Like I feel like it would gone for a long time. I feel like there'd be almost like a stalemate because like you also got to think, how are you going to have the public's support on this, like to not like maybe not the support, because you always have the looming, hey, we may all just die because of the Covenant, which that's a good reason to keep the war going. But like, how do you measure, as a general, how would you measure success? Like, obviously you can't necessarily say we're going to capture this, because like you said, our era of superiority for the first time in our in their human history, they're no longer, air superiority is 0, and that air superiority in the sense of space, that also correlates with air. You also said battlefield is always changing, ground's getting lost, ground's getting taken. Like, how is it that they I guess like success, like we finally took this, and then the Covenant takes it.
It's probably, yeah, it probably boils down to like a battle of attrition. How bad do they really want something? With Harvest in Halo Wars, and Captain Cutter and the UNSC that was there, they needed Harvest, and so they were going to send everything that they could to get that. They were going to do it, and finally, I mean, even in Halo Wars, there are still Covenant on Harvest, but it's considered humanities, because they control most of the territory, and they've exhausted so many resources on it that they felt that, okay, no, we've got this. If any Covenant show up, we can kind of deal with them. But still, that didn't mean that there weren't still skirmishes going on throughout the entire planet.
I got you, man. I got you. But, man, dude, like that, it's crazy, dude. It really is crazy, because, like, going back to when you said we can't fathom on how this all really, I guess not only logistics, because logistics go in the routes, and just the basically the mass force you have to supply all of this, let alone really understand the battle, I guess the strategy as a general in that sense. Because I mean, honestly, we haven't even seen it in our time since World War II. If you think about it, like, a rich country has not been at war with a rich country. I don't know how that would play out. Some people say we would go straight to nukes, and it's like, would we? Because I mean, obviously generals aren't going to be stupid. They're not going to be like, look, we launch our nukes, it's not just going to end with them, it's going to end with us and everyone as we know it. So I don't think we would rush
sort of
straight
like
to
a
nukes.
humanitarian, aspect with it.
We can only look at what we've been through recently with being in Iraq. But then again, they didn't have a navy really at all. They didn't have a air force pretty much at all. So like, we had complete and total freaking air superiority. So like, it's just really hard to fathom, especially with our current generation. So with that note, I'll leave it to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, so Brody, I really appreciate you, coming on and letting me, asking some questions. I really hope to hear from you again, and we'll always be playing Halo. In fact, we'll actually have some custom game nights coming up here soon. I'll make sure to leave details in the description if you're finding this on YouTube or anywhere else on the Instagram page. If you guys want to come join us, if there are any other questions you want to ask, even while we're playing custom games, I'll do my best to answer them. We'll try to have the best time that we can. And Brody, thank you again so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. If there are any more questions that you have or this seems to do well. We'll probably do another one of these again. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, dude, absolutely no problem, man. It was a blast. I've been itching to ask you a lot of these questions, and it's freaking awesome that we get to do it on this platform.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll check you next time.